Hello, it's Foster Joseph Sayers III. It's May 28th, 2020, and this is Sayers Soapbox. Today is a somber episode as I'm going to talk about the death of George Floyd, who was murdered by police in Minnesota. And I say murdered because if you watch the video, which I'm going to link to in the comments, because I wasn't able to figure out how to get the sound to work when I recorded it, sharing my screen. And I think his pleas for his life, as well as those around him, are very important to that viewing experience, to really appreciate just how terrible his murder was. And so I'm going to link to that. But I just want to take the time to say that I believe that Black Lives Matter. And I'm very frustrated that since that movement started, we just haven't seen any progress from the point of policy and real change in our law enforcement, because it's still happening, right? Black men are still being subject to extrajudicial killings, and it needs to stop. I'm tired of seeing white people outraged that black athletes kneel during the national anthem to bring attention to this social injustice, and yet not being outraged at these killings. People need to confront their own prejudice. People need to confront their own racism and become anti-racist, because this conduct is outrageous. You can have a high opinion of law enforcement and respect them. I do. I have people that I love very dearly that serve in law enforcement and who I admire very much. And you can admire those people, but demand that in general, law enforcement be held to a high standard and that they be prosecuted when they commit crimes like this officer did by kneeling on this man's neck and killing him and taking his life. It didn't need to happen. No one can watch this video and tell me that taking this man's life was a necessity. There's no evidence of that. And we need, as a country, which means not just people of color, but people who are white, who have white privilege, like myself, to become allies, to become anti-racist and demand more. Right? Those athletes that were kneeling were trying to get through to you about the social injustice that still permeates our society. That still means that 1 in 1,000 black men is going to be killed by the police. That is a reality that I don't want to accept, and I don't think any of us should. And if a free society like America, where we value equality and equal rights under our Constitution. Relative to this case, this police officer needs to be charged with murder. I think the other officers on the scene need to be charged as accessories to murder. It's high time a message was sent that this conduct cannot be tolerated against our black citizens. The other changes are requiring body cameras, on all police, requiring it, making it a felony in all jurisdictions to turn off your body camera during an arrest, including more cameras in vehicles, dash cameras, but also within the police cars. I think we need constant surveillance. And we need to root out racism. And if a police officer is known to be racist and prejudiced and has there's any proof of that, they've made, remarks on social media or whatever, they need to be removed from the police force or undergo extensive sensitivity training. And I think a zero tolerance is really probably the preferred approach, at least from where I sit. But, I'm not trying to eliminate whole swaths of our law enforcement. But maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing. But also, law enforcement needs to get really serious about diversity programs and also on community outreach. I mean, I think there need to be programs and ways for these police to get acquainted with black men and, young adolescents in their communities, um, so that they're not just a face, that they're a person to them, and that they can have more of a dialogue because they've met this kid before. I mean, so many times. I mean, uh, George Floyd was obviously a mature man, and was no way a kid, but we do know, with Trayvon Martin famously being murdered by George Zimmerman, although he was acquitted for that murder. A lot of us do not believe he was justified in taking Trayvon Martin's life, and that's why I talk about these young people because, there is fear, and people do not react their best when they are afraid, and we need to eliminate that fear. People are people, and developing a healthy presence of law enforcement in the community where they are truly peace officers and they know their community because they are at events. I would rather these men spend time at community events than just randomly patrolling or running radar traps, right? Like, we need to fundamentally transform law enforcement in our society, and it has to be at a community level. And I hope that absent some nationwide effort, that law enforcement at the local level start figuring out how can we implement programs so that the police are introduced in a safe, healthy way to people so that they look at a resource for help to these kids, versus as someone to fear. But we need, as a society, to start thinking about these things because Black Lives Matter. And I don't want to hear this Blue Lives Matter nonsense because no one ever said the police lives didn't matter. We're saying Black Lives Matter too. And if they did matter, and if we did value them equally, then we would not see the persistent extrajudicial murder of black men in our country. We just wouldn't. So please, let this be the last time that a man begs law enforcement for his life. Let this be the end. This must stop. There is a better way, and we have to find it because Black Lives Matter.